Hey everyone, it's Matt here with Nightrun Studio and welcome back to our Enemy AI mini-series. So far in this video we've got things set up so that our player can attack our enemy, and we've got some nice visual feedback with knockback and a red flashing effect. That said, when the player is attacked while his health does deplete, there's no visual feedback whatsoever. So in this video we'll add a player damage state that will include a knockback, animation, damage flash, and then at the end we'll also take a moment to just tweak some values so that we can have evasive maneuvers, being able to slide beneath the enemy's attack in order to avoid damage. That's where we're headed in this video. Let's get started. Alright, so very first thing, just a little bit of a setup issue. At the moment you'll notice that our health script is on our player, which is not typically where we're putting core components. Those are all on the sprite here, like combat, magic, and you'll notice we have health here as well. Somehow we got that in two places. So let's just remove the one from players. We want to be consistent, keeping all of our supporting core components together on the child here. I'm also going to fix my max health so it's actually a full value. Now in order to make that work, we're just going to have to quickly pop into our enemy combat. Here, if you go down to our perform melee attack, you can see that once we found a collider on the target layer, we then just look on that object for a health component. That said, for our player, the health component is on a child, so we're just going to change this to get component in children. And now when we get back in the game and run a test, we'll see that the child health component is now working properly. Alright, with that done, we're ready to get started on our animations. So let's grab our animation pane and just pull it up here so we can see what we're doing. From here, just make sure you're clicked on the sprite and we can create a new clip. I'm going to go into my animations folder and we'll call this one damaged. Now if I go into my sprites folder and find the character blue from the pack, it's going to be in the first set here. Let's go to our sprite editor. And as we go through, you can see that there is damaged animations here from frame number 38 through to 41. Those are the ones we're going to want to use. So back in Unity, we can grab those sprites and drag them up into the animation pane. Don't forget to duplicate that last one so that it lasts just as long as the others. We can then select them all and drag it out over about 20 frames. Looks pretty good, and I'm going to add a damage flash as well. So let's hit record, and by the first frame change here, let's set our color to fully red. And then by the end, over the next 15 frames, we can have it gradually go back to white. If I hit play, that's looking pretty good. While we're still working with our damage sprite, I'm just going to search for damage to find the animation and make sure to turn off loop time. With that done, we can put our animation pane away and head up to our animator. Again, making sure to click on our player sprite. I'm going to put the damaged animation up here with my casting and attack, because that just seems logical. We'll then make a bool, like all of our parameters are, for is damaged, and I'll move it up top here. With that done, we can set a transition going into damaged, and another one leaving. Make sure that we enter whenever is damaged is true, and then we're going to exit when is damaged is false, making sure to turn off exit time and duration so that it happens immediately. With that done, we're all set up for our animation and we're ready to get coding. Let's head into our scripts folder, go to player, and here we're going to create a new mono behavior script, and we'll call this one PlayerDamagedState. Now this state will be very similar to our enemy damaged state, and I even thought of just copy pasting that one and making tweaks, but I feel like we'll understand our state better and learn more if we actually write it out. So let's start by getting rid of start and update, and making sure that this inherits from the base player state. At this point, we can create our constructor, a public player damage state that takes in a reference to the player. We're also going to pass that reference along to the base. Now I always like to be able to test our code early, so we're just going to set this up for now so that it will play the animation when we enter the state. So let's create our override void enter method. We do want to add the base enter, that way any logic that happens to be in the base state's enter will run alongside this logic. And now we'll just tell our anim to set its bool for is damaged to be true. I'll then just create the exit method, and while we won't have a way to exit yet, at least it will be set up. It'll be very similar to this, calling the base exit method, and then it will just tell the anim to set its bool for its damage to false. With that done, we have a bare bones state that we can test. We just need a way to actually enter it. Now if we think back to our enemy, he has this enemy damage component, which simply listens to the health script to any time that we take damage or die. And then it has methods that run the logic for what's supposed to happen when those things happen. Our player doesn't actually have anything analogous to this, and so we're going to go ahead and create that now. So first of all, I'm just going to copy the enemy version, as the outline will be helpful for us. Then we'll head into our player scripts and create a damage script for our player. Alright, now when we get in here, I'll just grab all this code except for the name of the class and paste in the enemy logic, and we're just going to make some change. First of all, our player doesn't have death effects, so we can get rid of that. However, the rest is pretty similar. We're going to be talking to the player script rather than the enemy. They use the exact same health script, so we can keep that, which means that their on-enable and disable will be identical. Both of them want to listen to the health script for whatever damage or death occurs. Then we can head down to these bottom methods, which will start the same, though currently we don't have any logic for our player's death, so we can delete that. We'll get to that in the next video. And now let's look at handle damage. Now we do still want to calculate knockback whenever damage comes in. Our enemy's going to send over his position through the health script, so that's already taken care of, and then we'll just calculate the direction. If the player's X is greater than the attacker's X, that means the player's on the right, and his knockback should go to the right, if not to the left. And then the part that's just going to change a little down here is how we send the player into his damaged state. So we can delete this line and just tell our player that he needs to change state to the player's damaged state. Now that will give us an error because our player doesn't yet know about the damaged state, so we're going to have to head on over to player now. I'm going to go with a sort of quasi-alphabetical sort of thing here, so let's come after crouch and we can add damaged in there. We'll make a public player damaged state called damaged state. Alright, so then down in awake, we can actually create the state when the game starts. So we'll have our damage state equal to a new player damage state, and make sure to pass a reference to this script along to it. Back in Unity, let's go to our player sprite, add this new damage component, and make sure that it has a reference both to our player and also to the health script here. Now when we come on in and get attacked, you'll notice that we do in fact go to our damage state. We have no way to leave it or re-enter it, but we are getting there, so this is a good start. Alright, so I think it's about time we actually added that knockback. Let's head into our player damage state and create some variables. The first will be a private float called timer, which will actually do the counting down of our knockback. And then we'll have another float, this one for our knockback velocity, so both the direction and the force of the knockback. Next, we'll have a private float for the knockback duration, which is just how long each knockback should last. Now the question is, where should this data lie? Each of our enemies has a special config file that holds all of its stats, and that's great because each enemy needs its own set of stats. But there's only one player, so we don't need a special scriptable object. We can actually just store this on the player, using each component to store the stats that make sense in their context. So let's go back into that damage script we created earlier. So in here, we'll make a header first of all for our knockback settings, and then just declare two public floats. The first one can be for our knockback force. Notice this is not velocity, it's just the force itself, as we don't know the direction yet. And then we'll make a public float for the knockback duration. I'm going to set mine to 0.2 seconds for now. Now, similar to health, magic, and combat, we need a way for our states to access this data. So let's head into player, where we can go to our core components and add a reference to the damage component. We'll then also need to go into our player state and create a damage reference there. We'll call it damage, and then when we set up the state, we'll just make sure that this state knows that damaged is equal to the player's damage script. Alright then, let's head back to our damage state. We're now in our enter method. We can set our knockback duration right away, just letting this script know that its knockback duration is equal to the one in our damage script. Now we're ready to apply some force, but first we have to do some calculations. So here we're going to add a new method that we'll put in our states sometimes when we need to get special data passed into the states for them to be able to act. We'll make a public void set parameters here. This one's just going to take in an integer for our knockback direction. Once it has a direction, it will be able to calculate the velocity, and here we'll just take in that knockback direction and multiply it by our damage's knockback force. Now the question is, where do we call that and how does it know what direction? Well, first of all, let's go to our enemy combat, where you can see that anytime he deals damage, he doesn't just tell the health script how much damage, but also gives it his position. Our health script then takes in that information and makes sure that when it calls the on-damaged event, it passes along the source position, or where the attack came from. That way, in our player's damage script, as soon as its event is called, it already knows where the attack came from. We've got the logic here already to calculate which direction the knockback will need to be. Now we just need to pass that along to our damaged state. We'll do this right before we change states by telling player that its damaged state needs to set its parameters, and here in brackets we can just pass along the knockback direction that we just calculated. On the very next line then we'll actually enter the state, and it will have all the data it needs for knockback. Back in our damaged state, we can now apply that knockback effect and enter by telling the player that its rigid body's linear velocity should get a new vector 2, and here for the x value, we'll just put that knockback velocity that we calculated in set parameters. For the y, we still want to have gravity, so we'll just allow our rigid body to calculate its own linear velocity on the y-axis. Once again, I'm going to save all and then head back to Unity. Now here we just need to click on our player, make sure that our player script does in fact have a reference to that damaged script that we just created, and then we're ready to hit play. When we get in the game, we'll notice that now we are in fact taking damage and actually getting knocked back, though we still don't ever leave the state and we don't have a way to re-enter or anything like that. So it's time to start using those timers. Let's head back into our damaged state, and now we can use our public override void fixed update in order to calculate how long we should stay in knockback. So first of all, let's just take this script's knockback duration and make sure that it counts down. We can do this by subtracting time.fixedDeltaTime. Here then, if our knockback duration ever gets to be 0 or less, we'll first of all tell our rigid body that its linear velocity should stop completely, so we'll put vector 2.0. At this point, we're ready to do a transition into another state. And this one is actually really simple. We're just gonna automatically go to our player's idle state. It doesn't really matter whether we're in the air or whatever happens next, as our idle state has the ability to transition to wherever we need to go. With that done, we can give this a test. Our player's now taking damage quite nicely. He can get knocked into the air, and that also looks just fine. All right, the only thing right now that we'd like to add is just a little bit of nuance. I'd like the ability to be able to slide underneath the kobold's attack and evade if I'm careful. And at the moment, that just isn't gonna work. So I'm just gonna quickly go into my kobold's config here. I'll make sure that I've turned on my gizmo so I can see his attack range, and I'm just gonna minimize the attack range just a little bit to start, moving it down to about 1.2. You can already see that it's shrunk a bit, and now I'm just gonna kind of play a little bit of a game where I adjust it by moving it just a little bit upwards. If I go into his animation and turn on his attack swing here, I can see exactly where the swipe should be. I actually want to make sure that his attack range exactly sort of covers the bottom end of that swipe. That way the visual actually matches what's happening when he attacks, and if I evade the visual of his swing, I'll actually evade being damaged. With that little tweak, we add a nice bit of nuance to our combat, making it much more interesting than just a trade punch type affair. Now we're able to actually dodge some attacks. All right, when I get in the game, I can try that out, and not only is knockback working for both myself and the enemy, but I'm now able to dodge below his knife attack. All right, this is starting to look pretty good. The next thing I'd just like to do is to make sure that we actually have something happen when our character and enemy die. We'll get there in the next video. Until then though, this is Matt with Nightrun Studio. Cheers.